You think your rabbit does nothing when you're not home. That's the comforting version, the version most owners picture without really thinking about it. Your rabbit eats a little hay, drinks some water, stretches out in a sunspot, maybe naps for a few hours, and then quietly waits until the sound of your keys turns the whole day back on again. And sometimes that is what happens. But sometimes it isn't, because rabbits are experts at hiding behavior from the person they're most attached to. In front of you, many of them look almost too simple, calm, quiet, predictable. They sit there like nothing complicated is happening inside them. No barking, no whining, no obvious meltdown, no dramatic performance that tells you exactly how they feel. So you assume the silence means peace. Then you come home and notice small things. The water bowl is slightly out of place. The cardboard tunnel has been pushed halfway across the room. There are fresh bite marks on the edge of something your rabbit ignored all week. The litter box has more scattered hay around it than usual. Nothing looks destroyed exactly, just changed, adjusted, like the room kept moving after you left. And that is the part most people miss. A rabbit alone does not simply wait. A rabbit notices. A rabbit monitors. A rabbit reacts to the house becoming different the moment you disappear from it. That matters because rabbits do not experience being alone the way humans imagine being alone. They are not sitting there thinking in sentences. They are not replaying memories of you walking out the door like a sad movie. What they are doing is something more immediate, more physical, and, in some ways, more revealing. They are reading the environment. The moment you leave, the sound changes. The floor stops vibrating with your footsteps. Your voice disappears. Your movement through the room disappears. The pattern your rabbit has been orienting to all day suddenly collapses. And for a prey animal, a sudden change in pattern is never nothing. That's one of the most important ideas in rabbit psychology. Predators often relax when things go quiet. Prey animals check why it got quiet. So the first thing your rabbit does when you leave is usually not dramatic. It is not the kind of behavior that would go viral on a pet camera clip. It is often just a pause. A stillness, ears moving slightly, eyes open, body held in a way that says less resting and more collecting information. If you looked at that moment casually, you might think your rabbit was relaxed. But stillness in rabbits can mean several different things. It can mean comfort, it can mean caution, it can mean the nervous system is waiting for a little more evidence before deciding what kind of afternoon this is going to be. And that's the real question behind the title. What does your rabbit actually do when you're not home? Not what looks cute in theory, not what owners hope is happening because the alternative feels uncomfortable. What does your rabbit's nervous system actually do once the person it has calibrated part of its world around is suddenly gone? Because once you start looking closely, a rabbit's alone time behavior tells you a lot about trust, stress, territory, boredom, and attachment. And some of it starts before you even leave the room. For many rabbits, the first phase after you leave is not rest. It is vigilance. That word matters because it explains why so many owners misread what they would see on a pet camera if they actually watch the first 10 or 15 minutes. They expect either calm napping or obvious distress. But rabbits often do something in between. They become very still, but not in a loose, deeply relaxed way. Their ears rotate, their body stays ready. Their eyes remain open longer than you would expect from an animal that is fully settled. Silence, in other words, does not always mean comfort. And that is one of the hardest things for people to understand about rabbits. A rabbit can be quiet and still while remaining highly alert to change. In the wild, that kind of behavior keeps prey animals alive. In a living room, it becomes easy for owners to mislabel it as, "My rabbit was totally fine." Maybe your rabbit was fine. Maybe your rabbit was watching. The difference is subtle, but the psychology behind it is not. Rabbits live through patterns. They learn the normal rhythm of a home the same way they learn the path to hay, the sound of a treat bag, or the exact location of the chair leg they are not supposed to chew. Your presence is part of that rhythm. Your footsteps, your voice, the way you move from one room to another, the moments when you open the fridge, sit on the couch, turn on the sink, or walk past their enclosure without stopping, all of that becomes part of the map. Then you leave, and the map changes. The house becomes quieter, but also stranger. Your rabbit now has to answer a series of very small but important questions. Is the environment stable? Is anyone else coming in? Are the sounds outside the door relevant? Is this normal quiet, or the kind of quiet that means I should stay careful for a while? That is why many rabbits pause before doing anything else. They do not immediately flop over and relax the second you are gone. They often wait for the room to prove itself predictable again. This is also why some rabbits seem to move more only after a delay. Owners imagine a simple sequence. Person leaves, rabbit starts doing rabbit things. In reality, it is often person leaves, rabbit evaluates, rabbit continues monitoring, rabbit tests the environment, and only then begins to move more freely. And if your rabbit is especially bonded to you, that first phase can become even more interesting. Because bonded rabbits often use people as reference points, not in the way dogs do, not with the same outward dependency, but in a very real behavioral sense. Your presence tells them something about safety, rhythm, and what kind of state the space is in. When that reference point disappears, some rabbits don't panic, they recalibrate. You can sometimes see this in the way they position themselves after you leave. A rabbit may stay near the doorway for a few minutes, or near the area where you were last moving, or in a spot that gives a wide visual angle of the room. Again, none of this looks dramatic. That is exactly why people overlook it. Rabbit psychology is often quiet psychology. The signs are there. They are just smaller. And that makes owner interpretation dangerous sometimes, because humans tend to trust the absence of noise too much. If a dog is distressed, you might hear barking. If a rabbit is unsettled, you may hear nothing at all. You may come home to a perfectly intact room and assume the day passed in total peace, when what actually happened was a long period of low-level environmental scanning followed by cautious re-engagement with the space. That distinction matters, because the way your rabbit behaves in those first minutes after you leave can tell you whether you're looking at confidence, uncertainty, attachment, or stress. And once that first phase passes, most rabbits move into something even more revealing. They begin making rounds. Once the room feels stable enough, many rabbits stop monitoring and start moving. This is the phase most owners never see, and it is often the most revealing. Because when you are home, your rabbit is not just interacting with the room, it is interacting with the room with you inside it. Your position changes things. Where you sit changes where your rabbit chooses to rest. Whether you are walking around changes how exposed the floor feels. Whether you are paying attention changes how bold or withdrawn your rabbit becomes. Even when you think you are not doing anything, you are still part of the environment your rabbit is constantly organizing around. The moment you leave, that variable disappears. And what's left is your rabbit's raw relationship with territory. This is when many rabbits begin making rounds through the same spaces in a pattern that looks casual to a human, but is not casual at all. The hay area, the litter box, the tunnel, the edge of the rug, the space under the chair, the doorway, back across the room, pause, groom, listen, move again. To us, it can look random. To the rabbit, it usually isn't. Rabbits are animals of route, repetition, and spatial confirmation. They do not just exist in a room, they continually check it, they revisit key points. They move between safe zones and open zones in patterns that help the nervous system answer one basic question: is everything still as it should be? That's why your rabbit may seem more active when you are gone than when you are home. Not necessarily more playful, not more mischievous, more self-directed. Without you in the room, the rabbit's attention turns more fully toward the territory itself. And this is where owners sometimes misunderstand what activity means. They see signs that their rabbit moved around a lot and assume the rabbit must have been bored. Sometimes that's true. But activity and boredom are not the same thing. A rabbit making repeated circuits may be exploring, regulating, checking resources, re-establishing familiarity, or burning off a low level of arousal that built up during the first phase after you left. In other words, movement can be a sign of confidence. It can also be a sign of incomplete comfort. That is why context matters so much. A rabbit who hops through the room, stops to eat hay, grooms, stretches out, and then resumes wandering is probably using the space in a healthy, flexible way. A rabbit who repeats the same path over and over with a slightly tense body, limited rest, and frequent pauses to listen may be telling you something else. Not necessarily panic, but not full relaxation either. This is one of the hardest parts of rabbit psychology for owners, because rabbits often hide distress inside behaviors that look normal from a distance. Eating can happen under stress. Grooming can happen under stress. Stillness can happen under stress. Movement can happen under stress. With rabbits, the meaning is often not in the behavior alone. It is in the quality of the behavior, the pace, the body posture, the transitions, the ease, or lack of ease. And then there is another layer to this. Your rabbit is not only making rounds through space, it is also making rounds through expectation. Because rabbits notice routines very quickly, they know when food usually appears, they know what time the room normally becomes active again, they know what sequence of sounds often predicts your return. So when they move through the space while you are gone, part of that movement is not just territorial, it is temporal. They are moving through the hours, checking the room against what usually happens next. That is why some rabbits become more active near the time you normally come home. They are not reading a clock the way we do. They are reading accumulated patterns, light changes, outside sounds, household rhythms, internal expectation. A rabbit that suddenly becomes more alert late in the afternoon may not be restless at random. It may be anticipating the restoration of a pattern it has learned to count on. And that brings us to the behavior owners notice most once they return. Not the rounds, not the waiting, the chewing. This is the part owners take personally. You come home and the corner of the rug is frayed. The cardboard box looks like it lost an argument. The baseboard has fresh marks. The edge of a woven basket, a chair leg, the side of a paper bag, something that seemed completely uninteresting while you were there has suddenly become the focus of intense rabbit attention. And the first instinct is almost always the same. My rabbit did this because I left. Sometimes that is partly true, but not in the way most people think. Rabbits do not usually chew as revenge. They are not trying to punish you for going to work. They are not making a dramatic emotional statement designed for you to decode later. Rabbit behavior is usually less theatrical than that and more physical, more immediate, more tied to regulation, environment, and the need to act on the world with the body. Chewing is one of the clearest examples of that. A rabbit chews because chewing is not just destruction. It is investigation. It is occupation. It is regulation. It is the nervous system taking energy, uncertainty, curiosity, frustration, or arousal and pushing it through the mouth into something tangible. That's why the same rabbit who ignores a certain object when you're home may suddenly start working on it the moment you're gone. Your absence doesn't create the mouth. Your absence changes the state the rabbit is managing with that mouth. And there are a few different versions of this. Sometimes the chewing is simple opportunity. You're not there, the room is quiet, the rabbit is making rounds, and an object that was previously part of the background suddenly becomes interesting enough to test. Texture matters. Resistance matters. Position matters. Rabbits often investigate the world through contact, and chewing is one of the most direct forms of contact they have. Sometimes it is boredom, but boredom in rabbits is often misunderstood. Human boredom sounds passive. Rabbit boredom often looks active. It looks like a brain that needs more variation, more manipulation, more foraging, more control over the environment than the room currently provides. In that state, the cheapest available project becomes the thing nearest to the rabbit's teeth. Sometimes chewing is stress regulation, not panic, not breakdown, just a rabbit with a nervous system carrying more activation than the environment is helping it discharge. In that case, chewing can function like pacing in another species, a repetitive behavior that helps process internal pressure. And sometimes, chewing is about environmental control. That one gets ignored a lot, but it matters. Rabbits like spaces to make sense. They prefer predictable routes, familiar textures, known hiding spots, known resources. When something feels unfinished, exposed, obstructive, or simply too available in the wrong way, a rabbit may interact with it until the room feels more behaviorally coherent. Not because the rabbit is decorating, because the rabbit is editing. This is why a rabbit might leave one object untouched for weeks and then suddenly fixate on it after a routine change. You moved a chair. You spent less time in the room. You changed the timing of free roam. You've been leaving earlier. The rabbit's world still looks like the same room to you, but from the rabbit's perspective, the logic of the room shifted, and that can pull attention toward very specific objects. That's the part most owners miss. The chewing itself is often not the whole message. The message is in the timing, the target, and the pattern. If your rabbit only chews when left alone, only chews specific textures, or only starts after changes in routine, that is not random destruction. That is information. And there is another common mistake here. People assume that if a rabbit is eating hay and chewing cardboard while they're gone, then everything must be fine. But healthy chewing and stress chewing can coexist. Rabbits do not always separate comfort behavior from coping behavior cleanly. A rabbit can forage, chew, groom, and still be managing a level of tension you would never guess from the room afterward. That is what makes rabbit psychology so easy to misread. The behaviors themselves are often normal. What changes is why they are happening and how often. Which brings us to a more uncomfortable possibility. What if your rabbit doesn't become destructive when you leave? What if your rabbit becomes quiet? Not calm quiet, not sleepy quiet. The kind of quiet that owners love to interpret as, he was good all day. Because in rabbits, just like in other animals, silence can hide more than people think. This is the easiest mistake to make. You come home and nothing looks wrong. No chewing damage, no scattered litter, no overturned bowl, no obvious signs that your rabbit spent the day doing anything unusual at all. Maybe your rabbit is in the same general spot where you left them. Maybe they look up at you, maybe they don't. The room is quiet, the rabbit is quiet, and your brain immediately reaches for the most comforting interpretation available. Everything was fine. And sometimes it was. But not always. Because one of the most misleading things about rabbits is that their stress does not always get louder. Sometimes it gets smaller, more compressed, more internal. A rabbit under low confidence or prolonged uncertainty does not necessarily become dramatic. It may become reduced, less exploratory, less expressive, less willing to spend energy on behavior that feels unnecessary or potentially risky. That matters because owners are often trained by other animals to think distress should look active, barking, pacing, scratching, calling out. But rabbits are prey animals. Their nervous systems are built around concealment as much as action. When the environment feels off and they cannot meaningfully change it, many rabbits do not escalate outward. They narrow. Less movement, less stretching, less full-body relaxation. More time in one safe zone. More half-resting, half-monitoring postures, where the body appears still but never fully soft. And from a human perspective, that can look almost identical to a peaceful afternoon. That is the danger. A rabbit who spends hours in one place while you're away may be deeply comfortable, or that rabbit may be using stillness as a strategy because stillness feels safer than active engagement. Without seeing the quality of the posture, the transitions between states, and the rabbit's usual baseline, it is very easy to get that wrong. This is why context is everything. A relaxed rabbit does not just stay still. It unfolds. The body loosens, the feet extend, the weight shifts naturally, grooming is fluid, Rest alternates with movement in an easy rhythm. There is flexibility. A more uncertain rabbit often looks different. The body stays compact. The ears may remain more engaged with sound. The rabbit may rest, but not fully commit to rest. It may move, but only minimally. It may choose safety over curiosity for most of the time you are gone. And because there is no obvious crisis, owners often reward themselves with the wrong conclusion. They think, "My rabbit is so calm when I'm out," when in reality, the rabbit may simply have learned that quiet caution is the most workable option available. That doesn't necessarily mean severe distress. It doesn't mean your rabbit is suffering every time you leave, but it does mean that calm should not be judged only by the absence of chaos. One of the deepest truths in animal behavior is that passivity can be misread very easily. Humans like passive animals because passive animals are convenient to live with. They fit cleanly into our schedules. They don't force a question. But passivity is not the same thing as comfort. Sometimes it is comfort. Sometimes it is uncertainty with nowhere productive to go. And in rabbits, that line is especially easy to miss, because so much of their communication is subtle to begin with. This is also why cameras can change how owners understand their rabbits. Not because every rabbit owner needs to watch 8 hours of footage every day, but because even a short sample can reveal something important. Does your rabbit gradually loosen and use the whole space after you leave? Do they settle into a healthy cycle of moving, eating, grooming, and resting? Or do they remain compressed, hyper-aware, and behaviorally limited for much longer than you assumed? Those are two very different afternoons, and they point to two very different inner experiences. By the time most owners notice a problem, they are looking for something dramatic. But rabbit psychology usually shifts long before anything dramatic appears. It shifts in confidence, in route choice, in posture, in whether your rabbit uses the environment freely or only carefully. So if your rabbit seems good when you're gone, that may be true. But good should mean more than silent. It should mean your rabbit is able to return to normal rhythms in your absence. Eat comfortably. Explore comfortably. Rest comfortably. Groom comfortably. Exist in the space without spending the whole time negotiating whether the space still feels safe enough to use. And that brings us to the most important question of all. What actually shapes the difference? Why do some rabbits seem to handle your absence easily, while others become hypervigilant, overactive, destructive, or strangely shut down? Because the answer is not just personality. A lot of it comes from what your rabbit has learned to expect from the environment you built around them. The biggest mistake owners make is assuming their rabbit is reacting only to being physically alone. That is part of it. But usually, your rabbit is reacting to something larger than simple absence. It is reacting to the version of the environment that exists when you are not there, and to whether that version still feels predictable, usable, and safe. That is why two rabbits can be left alone for the same number of hours and have completely different experiences. One rabbit moves through the room easily, eats hay, checks a few spots, grooms, flops, rests, wakes up, makes another round, waits near the usual return time. Nothing dramatic. Just a healthy rhythm of confidence and quiet occupation. Another rabbit spends the first part of your absence in vigilance, the next part in repetitive movement or chewing, and the rest of the day in a tense kind of stillness that looks calm until you know what to look for. The difference is rarely just one rabbit is needy and the other is independent. The difference is usually in expectation, environment, and nervous system confidence. What has your rabbit learned about this space when you are gone? Has your rabbit learned that alone time still contains structure, that the room remains predictable, that there are safe routes, useful objects, satisfying chewing options, enough foraging, enough cover, enough familiarity, enough confidence in the routine to let the body soften instead of stay half-ready all day? Or has your rabbit learned something else? That your departure makes the room feel flatter, less secure, less stimulating, less understandable, that the hours stretch with nothing to do except monitor, cope, and wait. Because when owners say, My rabbit misses me. That is often true, but it is incomplete. Sometimes your rabbit misses you. Sometimes your rabbit misses what your presence does to the room. You are not just a person to your rabbit. You are part of the structure of the environment. Your movement changes the emotional temperature of the space. Your routine changes when food feels near, when activity feels normal, when safety feels anchored. Remove that anchor, and the rabbit must either adapt well or spend energy managing the gap. That is why what helps is usually not one magic product or one cute trick. It is not about spoiling your rabbit less or giving one extra toy and hoping it fixes everything. What helps is making your absence easier for the rabbit's nervous system to understand. More predictable routine. Better foraging opportunities. Objects that are meant to be chewed, moved, entered, nudged, and investigated. A room that feels behaviorally rich instead of visually empty. Places to hide without becoming trapped. Places to perch, stretch, and observe. A setup that gives the rabbit things to do, not just space to sit in. And, just as importantly, transitions that make sense. If your rabbit becomes tense before you leave, pay attention to your departure pattern. Rabbits notice routines quickly. They may not respond to keys the way dogs often do, but they absolutely notice sequences. Shoes on, bag picked up, lights changed, a certain room closed off, a different energy in your movement. Over time, those details can become predictors. That does not mean you need to turn your life into a theatrical desensitization exercise. It means your rabbit may benefit from more consistency, not less. A steady routine often helps prey animals more than random reassurance does. If the timing of free roam, feeding, hay refresh, lighting, and departure cues becomes easier to predict, the absence itself can become easier to absorb. And then, there is the most uncomfortable truth in all of this. Some of what your rabbit does when you're not home is a reflection of the emotional climate you have already built when you are home. A rabbit that spends most of its day slightly uncertain, slightly under-enriched, slightly overstimulated, slightly lacking control over its environment does not start from neutral when you leave. It starts from a deficit. The absence simply exposes it. But a rabbit that already feels confident in its territory, already has meaningful routines, already knows where comfort lives in the room, often handles your departure very differently. Not because it loves you less, because its nervous system has more to stand on while you're gone. So what does your rabbit actually do when you're not home? Some rabbits rest. Some rabbits patrol. Some rabbits chew. Some rabbits wait near the doorway. Some rabbits move through perfectly healthy rhythms of hay, grooming, exploring, and sleep. Some go quiet in a way that is fine. Some go quiet in a way that isn't. And almost all of them are telling you something about how safe, predictable, and usable the world feels once your part of that world disappears. That is the real psychology of it. Your rabbit is not just reacting to your absence. It is revealing what your absence turns the environment into. If this changed how you think about your rabbit's day when you're not home, subscribe and leave a comment. When you come back, does your rabbit look deeply relaxed, strangely alert, or like they've quietly rearranged the room? In the next video, we're going even deeper into one of the behaviors owners misunderstand most: